Hi, I know I haven't posted on YouTube in a long time. I think it's been like 4 months. And first thing, you probably noticed that I did cut my hair. Wanted to point it out before everyone's like, where'd your hair go? I shaved it like a month or two ago, just because I had dyed it so many times that I just wanted to reset to my natural color. So I I just filmed this entire video and like 30 minutes of footage. It's ready to upload it, and somehow I lost all the footage. I don't know how. It's just ugh. But all the footage gone. So I have to refilm it. Great. So this story, this video is kind of a story time of the little medical scare I had this week. It's been a stressful week, and I'm about to tell you why. It's been a lot. It's been a lot. So the story starts Wednesday. So Wednesday was a normal day. Nothing really out of the ordinary. Like I felt fine. Everything was fine. I was like, just another day. Do. And then so around 6:30, yeah, 6:30, I was just eating dinner, and all of a sudden my entire left arm went numb. Just all the feeling in my left arm gone. Just difficult to move it. Couldn't feel it. Like I was like touching it and I couldn't tell that I was touching it. Like I no feeling in it basically. And so I'm like, okay, why is my arm numb? That's the first thing. Like, why? Um, at first I was like, maybe it just like hit it, or like I don't know. Maybe it's just numb for no reason. I don't know. So I take some Tylenol and like I lay down and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna wait and see if it goes away. And then after about an hour of having just a completely numb arm, no feeling, not really being able to use it, I'm like, okay, so either I'm just freaking out and making it worse, or there's something actually wrong. So I decide to Google it, which you shouldn't Google stuff like that, especially if it's a very general symptom, just like, but I typed in like um, left arm, like why is my left arm numb, or something along those lines, or like what could cause your left arm to go numb. And the first thing that comes up is like stroke, stroke, and I'm like, okay, and I'm like, yeah, I guess. I wasn't too worried because I felt fine. And I was like reading other stuff, and it was just like saying sometimes your arm gets numb, but if your whole arm goes numb, or your or it happens suddenly, seek medical attention immediately. And I'm like, oh no. One, my whole arm is numb. Two, it happened suddenly. So I'm like, okay, I think I should just go to the emergency room and see what they think. Like, I'm worried. Let's see what's happening. Um, so I get my mom to watch my daughter, and I drive myself to the emergency room. So where I live, there's not a hospital. It's like a smaller town. Um, there like there's a big city like half an hour away, but where I live doesn't have an actual hospital. It just has an urgent care clinic where like it has like nurses and doctors and stuff, but like it doesn't like provide, like you can't get admitted, or like it doesn't provide like a lot of services. It's basically for emergencies, kind of thing. And so I go in, and I get it, and I'm like, so they're like, so what brings you in today? And I'm like, so my whole arm went numb. And immediately they were like, oh, okay, and like asking me questions, and I could tell right away that they were legitimately concerned. They're like, this, like, we have no clue why this happened. So right away they brought me back into a room. So like immediately I saw a doctor. Like pretty soon after I got there, um, I was already talking to a doctor, which you know that you're like, it's like something to worry about if you're high priority like that. So I was getting a bit worried. And so the doctor comes in and she just tests both of my arms. She just does a whole bunch of like tests. So she's like, squeeze my hands, and it was pretty clear that something was wrong with my arm because like I couldn't really grip her hand with my left hand. My right hand was completely fine, but I couldn't really grip with it. Just numb, not really feeling anything. Like just really, just different. And so they're like, okay. She did all these tests, and she's like, okay, we're gonna get some blood work done, see what's going on. And so they get me, and they like put me into a room, and they immediately put an IV in my arm, and they like check my vitals again, and all this stuff. And then I wait for like a few minutes, and then they come in and they're like, okay, so we don't know what's happening, but we're going to give you some stroke medication, and an ambulance will be here to take you to a bigger hospital in about 5 minutes. And oh, okay. This is news to me. Like, I didn't really know. So, basically, with like left arm numbness or like any really stroke symptoms, is they treat them with stroke medications before they can rule out a stroke. Um, if they don't know for sure that you didn't have a stroke or you're not going to have a stroke, they will treat it as if it's a stroke. Um, so basically, I had some medication through my IV and just tests and all this stuff. They're just writing down everything they can. They keep coming and then they're like asking me like, so do you have a headache? How is your arm feeling? Are you feeling any better? Are you feeling any worse? And I'm just like, no, I don't have a headache. Um, no, it's not really better. I don't know what's going on. And so apparently, their first thought was like, this might be your first migraine. Because apparently, if you've never had a migraine before, um, when you get your first migraine, your arm can go numb. But I didn't have a headache. Um, no really other symptoms besides like weak arm, numb arm, all this stuff. So like right away they're like, we don't know what's going on. We need to take you to a bigger hospital and like see what's going on. So right away, these MTs come in and with like the big stretcher, like definitely like hey, we're here to take you to the hospital. Um, just come. And so they grab all my stuff, they put it in a bag, they like get me all like strapped into the stretcher, and they be out. So they haul me into the ambulance. I was not expecting that from my night. Like it was weird because like not like 2 hours ago I was like, or 3 hours, like yeah, like 4 hours ago I was completely fine, like nothing was wrong, and now I'm getting hauled into an ambulance to go to the hospital, and I'm like, I just I was confused and I was kind of nervous and scared, and so it's really nice EMT, and it wasn't my first time in an ambulance. Like I've ridden in an ambulance handful of times before, so it wasn't like new to me. And the 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 EMTs are always super nice, so like it's not the worst thing in the world. So if you don't know how like ambulances work, so there's the EMT that's driving, and then there's an EMT that just sits right next to you, and they'll talk to you. So she's asking me all these questions about like, so what's wrong, um, like, has this ever happened before, like, do you have any like medical history, like all of this stuff. um, and she like checks my blood pressure on both arms, and so she's just talking to me, and I'm just laying there like, what's going on, why is this happening, like all this stuff. um, and it was like about a half-hour drive to the hospital. So I basically just kind of talked to her and just tried to relax as much as possible, until finally it got to the hospital, and I was brought in, and right away I just they were like, and they're like, we need to bring her in to a CT scan right away, just to check if she had a stroke. Um, and so they basically, like, within 10-20 minutes of getting to the hospital, they like get me to like the emergency center, and then they take me straight to a CT scan, like barely breathe. Like I was like immediately, almost like straight from the ambulance to CT. Um, so they get me like all hooked up. They like put me over, and so I already had like an IV in my arm, and so they're like, okay, so stay completely still. We're gonna put dye in your arm. You might like. They're just like rattling off these things, and I'm just like so, like so overwhelmed that like I'm trying to listen as best I can, but like my brain is like, whoa, what's going on, all this stuff. So they get they do the CT scan, and then right away they put me, and they take me right back to like the emergency room that I was in, and so I'm just sitting there like I don't know what's going on. And so like the people that deal with strokes like came in, and again testing my arm, seeing how strong it is, if it's getting any better. And by this time, so around like I think it's around like 11, like 10 to 11 p.m. And by this time I have started getting a tiny bit more feeling in my arm. Still very numb, still couldn't really lift it very well. Like it was still really like kind of awful. um, and so they come in, and they're like, okay, so your CT scan is normal. Um, like there's no obvious stroke or nerve damage or any of that. But because you don't have a headache, and you don't have a history of migraines, and this has never happened before, and like we don't know exactly what it is routine to do an MRI scan just to check for any mini stroke or anything abnormal neurologically. Um, and they said, we don't know if we're going to admit you and do the CT scan in the morning, or if we're going to let you go tonight and have you come back to the hospital um, later in the week. Um, and so they basically said, just rest for like an hour or two, and we'll come back and talk to you. I'm like, okay. So I wait, and I'm just waiting, and I'm just watching everybody, just like listening to the nurses and just people watching, basically. And so like an hour and a half has gone by. It is like 12 o'clock at night at this point, and the nurse comes in, and they're like, have they told you that they're admitting you yet? And I'm like, no, I did not know that they're admitting me. And she's like, oh yeah, so we got a bed request. So you're gonna stay overnight, and have they talked to you yet? And I'm like, no, I haven't seen them in like a few hours. They're like, okay, I'll page them and get them to talk to you, and we'll get like your bed set up and everything. So I'm like, okay. And right away I go and I call my mom and I'm like, okay, mom, here's like, they're admitting me, they're gonna like, get me to spend the night, here and do an MRI in the morning. And she's like, okay, thanks for letting me know. Like, call me if anything changes, all this stuff. Uh, and so I'm like, okay, thanks, mom. And just more waiting. And finally, like, they're like, okay, you have a bed. We're gonna take you up right away. And so the stroke people come back and like they do one last test on like how well my arm is doing and all this stuff, and just asking me any other questions like, is it getting worse? Like, what's going on? Like, how are you feeling? Like all this stuff. And I'm like, so at this point, so it's around like 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was still like really numb and like still very little feeling. It was a little better than when I first went in, but like I couldn't really grip on, like, it was very weak, very cold, um, just not a lot of feeling, not a lot of strength. And so right away, so they bring me back up. So they bring me up and they get me into the room and they give me some food and I go to sleep. It was easy to get to sleep, but I felt around like 2, 3 in the morning, I'm all settled in and I get to sleep. And it wasn't an easy sleep, very tossy and turny. So I get to sleep and I wake up in the morning and I'm like, okay, I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm hungry. Let's just, they'll probably come in soon and let's just figure out what's going on, and I want to go home, like all this stuff. And so I expected to be like get into my they told me that I would probably get my MRI scan like before 10, and by like 12 o'clock I hadn't heard like anything, and I was very confused. And I asked the nurse and I'm like, okay, what's the story? Like, when am I getting my MRI? Like, I don't know what's going on, kid. Like, do you know what's happening? And she's like, I really don't know. We have the request for the MRI, but they're just trying to fit you in. Um, I'll let you know as soon as I hear anything. So I'm like, okay, basically just waiting. So um, I'm waiting pretty much all day, and then finally it's around like 3 p.m. I finally get, like, a lady comes in and she's like, okay, I'm gonna bring you down for your MRI. And I'm like, okay, good. And so she takes me down to get my MRI, and so the doctor comes in and there's like all these questions that they have to ask before they give you an MRI. So because an MRI is such like a magnet, you can't have any metal on your in your period, like anything like that. So they had to ask me like, have you had any surgeries? Do you have any like metal plates? Do you have any piercings? Like anything like this? And I'm like, no, 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 all of that. Do you have any metal on you? No. And so they like get me into the MRI, and it's like a big thing, like it's a big machine, and so they like put the headphones on me because it's super loud, and they like get me all like set up and like in the cage, like, okay, don't move. Here's like this. Here's your emergency call button. If you need us, you can squeeze this because I won't be able to hear you or anything. And so they like, I go into the machine, and after like a few minutes, nothing. And so the doctor comes back, and he like comes in. I'm like, and he gets like and he's like, I'm so sorry, but the mask you have on, because I was wearing a medical mask, the mask you have on has metal in the nose. I have to give you a new mask that doesn't have metal in it. It's like, okay, okay. And so I take off the mask, and he gives me a mask for the MRI because it doesn't have the metal piece nose. So he's like, okay, and so he has to put me back in. So like my head goes back in the little thing. He like does all this, like the cage, the headphones, all of that, and put me in. Luckily, if you don't know, MRIs are loud, very loud. So um, you have to like yeah. So MRIs are very loud, and you can't move an inch. Luckily, there were stickers on the inside, so I was able to look at something like. So it wasn't, but it was like really loud and shaky. Honestly, kind of relaxing. I don't think anybody else would find an MRI relaxing, but I had to stop myself from falling asleep halfway through, just because of all the like shaking and the like noises. It just kind of, I don't know. I'm weird sometimes, but no. So it was like 10 minutes, and so I got my MRI, and they're like, okay, you're good. We're gonna send you back to the room. The the brain team. I can't really say the word, but so the the doctors will come and talk to you in like a few hours or so, like, or they'll come and talk to you when they can. We just have to review and just make sure everything's normal in your MRI or check for any abnormalities. And so I'm like, okay. They take me back to my room, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and finally it's around like 7 or 8, like it's later at night, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? Like, what's the story? And they're like, oh, the the doctors, like the doctors that were gonna come to see you, they've gone home already. You're gonna have to stay another night. And I'm just like, no. Like, I just want to go home. Like, I'm done with all of this. Like, I don't want to have to stay another night. But they said, like, it's too late for them anyway. Just the timing that I got my MRI, I had to stay another night, which sucked. So I just stay another night. But what are you gonna do? They're busy. I wasn't high priority anyway. So it's time. Still really numb arm, really weak. Um, but just fell asleep, and then like 6, 7 in the morning, I'm woken up, and they're like, "Okay, we're the doctors. So your MRI was totally normal. Nothing wrong. Like you're totally fine. You didn't have a stroke. Like nothing serious." And I'm like, "Okay, so what happened? Like why is my arm numb? Like what happened?" And the doctor's just like, "So sometimes this happens where your brain just decides not to talk to the nerves in your arm anymore." And I'm like, "Oh, so my brain just like kind of like dipped out with my left arm." So he said, "Yeah, so basically um, the nerves and my brain weren't, the nerves in my left arm and my brain just weren't working together properly. I guess they had a falling out or something. I don't know." But he said that it happens sometimes. Um, People will get this, and the only way to like fix it is just time and practice. It said that it could take like a week or two, and your arm should be back to normal. And if it's not, you'd have to have more like physio stuff. And so I talked to the physiotherapist at the hospital, where she just had to like make sure that I could do everything at home, like that I could take care of myself, take care of my daughter, um, all of that stuff. Just yeah. So basically, just making sure that I could go home safely, and that I wouldn't be impaired at all. And so she said, basically, she said that you just have to keep using it and just like retrain your brain to connect to the nerve properly in your arm again. And I'm like, okay, thanks. She's like, okay, I think you're good to go home. So finally, they discharged me after 2 days. So I went into the urgent care at like 6:30. p.m. on Wednesday, and I finally got out at around 1:30 or like 12 in the afternoon, like around noon on Friday. So it I had to be in there for a full day, and my arm is still not back to normal. Still a lot of work has to be done. So basically, like at this point, I have gotten a lot of the feeling back. It's still a very like dulled sensation. So like I can't feel my left arm nearly as much as my right. And basically it's just a lot harder to move my left arm. You can see I've been using my right arm mainly to because I talk with my hands, but I can't really do that with my left arm because it's very weak, and just like squeezing or just like clicking things or like pushing in a lock or stuff are pretty hard right now for me, and it's just really weak and a lot of work to move and use properly. But it is getting better, and at least I didn't have a stroke. Like that's a good thing. No, it was pretty scary, and just whew, it was a stressful few days. But at least I'm fine, and my arm will get back to normal. It'll just take time and practice, but definitely my arm did have a little fit, or my brain had a little fit and just stopped talking to my arm. But yeah, that's the story of how I was in the hospital